This is the Protestant Libertarian Podcast, a project of the Libertarian Christian Institute and part of the Christians for Liberty Network. I really hope that you guys enjoy today's show. All right, guys, welcome to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. This is going to be my third episode in a row on the presidential debate. If you listened in last Tuesday, and you should definitely go and check that out, I did an entire episode on why I believe that Christian libertarians on moral and philosophical grounds should not vote for Donald Trump. And then I presented last Thursday a recording of an LCI Greenroom that I did with Dave Casey, where we had not really a debate. It was a friendly discussion where I talked about my concerns regarding Donald Trump, and Dave Casey made the libertarian case for Donald Trump, why he as a libertarian thinks that Trump is the right choice in this election cycle, and then some of the problems that he has with the Chase Oliver campaign. So that was a really, really good conversation. So last week was kind of like a 1-2 punch. I gave you my thoughts on why Christians and libertarians should not support Trump, and Dave Casey gave you the insight on why he thinks that libertarians should support Trump. In both of those conversations, Chase Oliver was not at the center. And we all know that the third-party libertarian candidate has absolutely zero chance of winning the presidential election, but I actually kind of like Chase Oliver and a lot of the things that his campaign represents. There have been a lot of libertarians that have decided that they cannot support Chase Oliver and that he doesn't represent their brand of libertarianism. And there have been a couple of scandals within the Libertarian Party that have turned many libertarian voters away from Chase Oliver. But I do not feel the way about Chase Oliver that many members of the Mises Caucus in particularly feel about him. And so me and Jacob Winograd from LCI both plan on voting for Chase Oliver, and we wanted to give him an opportunity both to talk about his campaign and then also address some of the controversy within the Libertarian Party and within Libertarian Party circles regarding the Chase Oliver campaign. So we were finally able to schedule a green room session with Chase Oliver. And we did this live. I know some of you guys might have caught this already, but I'm going to edit it, and I think you should listen to it again. But we did this live, and essentially since Jacob Winograd is a Libertarian Party Mises Caucus insider and knows more about the inner workings of the party than I do, I had the opportunity to host the LCI Green Room, and Jacob and I asked Chase Oliver a couple of questions, and Jacob was able to kind of explain the concerns that many members of the Mises Caucus have with Chase Oliver and with his campaign, and Chase was able to respond to those and then also talk about his vision for the future. I thought that the conversation went really, really well, and I wanted to reproduce it on my show so that you guys can see or hear directly from Chase Oliver what he believes about all of these issues and the problems that are facing the party right now. So I hope that you guys really enjoy this episode. I know that usually on Tuesdays, I give you guys completely fresh content, not content that I've gotten from somewhere else. I will say that I have been very busy lately, and there's going to be a lot of good content coming up. I got some really good New Testament scholars lined up to come on my show in the next few weeks, and so I'm excited for you guys to hear that. But I thought that this week, replaying the interview that I did with Chase Oliver and Jacob Winograd would be helpful for you, and it kind of rounds out our discussion on this current election. You heard me talk about the reasons why I can't vote for Trump. You've heard Dave Casey talk about the reasons why libertarians should vote for Trump. And then now you will hear from Chase Oliver, the Libertarian Party presidential candidate himself. I really hope that you guys enjoyed this episode. All right, guys. Tonight, I have with us Jacob Winograd and Chase Oliver, the nominee for the Libertarian Party running for president as a libertarian. I'm really excited to talk to both of you guys tonight. It's a very awkward introduction because I'm not used to being the kind of host on this show, but I'm really excited to talk to both of you guys tonight. You know Jacob Winograd. He is the host of the Biblical Anarchy podcast for the Libertarian Christian Institute and is usually the guy who is running Green Room. Chase Oliver, everyone here should know him, but Chase, I'm going to give you a second to introduce yourself to our audience here. Just tell us a little about yourself and your background.
Yeah, 39-year-old, living in Atlanta, running for president, and I'm somebody who really believes in the power of the non-aggression principle. I've been a longtime activist, anti-war activist, pro-immigration activist, police accountability, criminal justice reform advocate, and now I've been running for president, formerly run for United States Senate in the state of Georgia, caused that lovely runoff in 2022 between Herschel Walker and Raphael Warnock, which made the duopoly pause and think about themselves for 4 weeks. And in doing so, kind of spurred the idea of me running for president. And here we are. And as of November 5th, I will have been running for office for 3 years straight, traveling across the country, across all 50 states, preaching the powerful message of liberty and rejecting the two-party system.
Yeah, well, man, I mean, you even made it out to our tiny county affiliate in Kenton County, Kentucky. So we know you've been all over the place and it's been really busy. I was first introduced to you in 2022 in your debate with Warnock. I have told a million people that they need to go and watch that because I thought you did such a great job of debating him, absolutely blew him away with your principles. But as you said before, running for the Libertarian Party is very exhausting and you don't get any of the media attention that the Republican or the Democratic candidate does. What made you want to become the Libertarian Party's presidential nominee?
Well, after I caused the runoff in the Senate race, we got tons of attention and tons of spotlight put upon us. And one of the things that was not just spotlight from media, but it was also from the two-party system. I got calls from Rand Paul's office asking me to endorse Herschel Walker. I had prominent Democrats in Georgia saying, hey, if you endorse Senator Warnock, we already know the state Senate race we're going to run you in, and we'll make sure you get elected, Chase. You'll be an elected official if you just become a Democrat and endorse Senator Warnock. And I rejected both of those offers. I pushed back against that and endorsed the need to have more options in the race. And when I did that, a lot of libertarians started calling me. I mean, almost the day after, literally the day after, we started getting calls, and that kind of built up. And at first I was like, hey, I've been running for office for a year. I want to take a little time off, get back to like a normal sense of life. But when enough people call, you say, let's explore it. And so I did the process of an exploratory committee. And so from about the end of December through April, we traveled across the country speaking with libertarians at local affiliate meetings, county meetings, these kinds of meetups. And what I heard was a really good response of the idea of me running for president. And from there on, we formed a formal campaign. We ran full steam ahead. We made sure we traveled to all 50 states because we thought it was important to contrast this campaign, the libertarian campaign, with that of Biden and Trump, who are only going to focus on a few swing states and who frankly don't have the energy or vigor to travel to all 50 states. And so, and we ran a very positive campaign. And that's what really inspired me to run, is that libertarians across the country said, hey, you're a very good communicator of our values in a very positive way that makes people want to check out the Libertarian Party or think about voting Libertarian. I apologize if you hear meowing. My cat is freaking out at the door.
No, that's all good. I couldn't hear that in the background. But it is really complicated, and a lot of people don't understand just how technical it is to run a campaign. Jacob, I kind of want to bring you in here real quick because I know that you've done some LP organization for the party in Pennsylvania, and you know a little bit about the nuts and bolts of what it takes just on a technical level to get a Libertarian Party presidential campaign up and running. Just talk a little bit about what that looks like on your end. So as Chase is out there running for president, what's it like for like state and local affiliates to try to make this work?
Well, the first thing that comes before any of it is just getting on the ballot. And as I'm sure Chase knows and Mike knows as well, that's you guys have been doing it across the country, but here in Pennsylvania, we had to work hard to make sure that we got all of our guys, including Chase and Mike, on the ballot. So the first thing was just going around and doing a whole bunch of door knocking, going to as many events as we could. I know Mike came out to my county in York to attend the York Fair to get signatures there. And so, yeah, events, door knocking, just doing whatever we could to get enough signatures to make sure that Chase, Mike, and the rest of our candidates here in PA, such as John Thomas, who I had on my show last night, could get on the ballot. That's like the uphill battle that every third party has to face. And I know that's something that's also important to you, Chase, is running to help get these candidates on the ballot and also help those down ballot candidates across the country.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It is the greatest challenge of running for president is making sure you can get on as many ballots as possible. We are on the ballot on 47 states. We are write-ins in the remaining 3, plus District of Columbia. I'll be frank, it should have been 48 states. There was a failure in one of those states where we had paid petitioners and half of the signatures were rejected because they were not valid. And we thought, hey, this will be an easy one to grab, just pay a couple folks to do it. And lo and behold, and we, lesson learned there. But New York and Illinois particularly just have really onus ballot access requirements that were just a real challenge to get on the ballot. But we are a choice for voters across the country. And of course, we do want to support those down ballot candidates. I was just in Pittsburgh supporting at a fundraiser with myself and making sure we had time to let all the candidates who were there to speak about their races and what they were up to. We heard from folks like state auditors, state treasurers, people who are running for state house or Senate, and our, the 2026 hopeful gubernatorial candidate was also there as well. We want to be supporting those candidates because they're the ones in the winnable, electable local races that if we can push them across the finish line, we can start seeing libertarianism in action and create proof of concept to be building our bench upward to higher and higher offices where we can continue to take more and more liberty back from an overly abusive government and return it back to people, sovereign individuals practicing self-governance. For me, that is one of the most important keys. And of course, hitting those ballot access thresholds. I find there's a lot of states where the votes we earn this November depend upon whether it's easier or more difficult to run candidates in the future, particularly at the statewide level in states like Ohio, in states like Georgia, in states like Minnesota. And so we want to make sure we're hitting those targets to make sure good, awesome libertarians can run in the future in those races.
Yeah, it's not even just about hitting those requirements, but we have to usually go well above those requirements because, as you said, the two parties are often looking to challenge as many of the ballot sheets as they can for usually what just amounts to technicalities, like, oh, we can't read this handwriting, or this person put Market Street, but they put ST instead of spelling out STAR. The whole they find the most ridiculous things to strike off ballots on, and people, I think, unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize the uphill battle that third party candidates fight just to show up when the American voter goes to vote at their election. We're not just kind of guaranteed a spot like the other two parties are.
I can give you a great example in my home state of Georgia. In Georgia, if you want to run for Congress, we have the highest threshold for running for Congress in the country. It's over 22,000 signatures you need. And so really we want you to get over 35,000 to basically overcome the challenges that are going to be tossed your way. And this is why the only time we've ever been able to run congressional candidates in Georgia is during a special election when that signature requirement is waived, which is why I ran in 2020 in a special election. But even more so, if you want to become a major party in Georgia, not just be a political body, which is what they consider the Libertarian Party of Georgia, you have to get 20% in a statewide race. 20%. And that is so putting the cart before the horse. You'd have to build up a movement to get 20% of the vote, but you can't do that if you're not given major party designation and have equal access to all the debates and all, inclusion and all these things. And so it's really government putting impediments in the way of building a challenge to duopoly, which is why we get less and less quality out of the two-party system, because they know they don't even have to provide you good candidates anymore. They can just put up whoever they want. And they've basically safely carved out 90% of the country to either be safe red or safe blue. And so for most Americans, they don't really have the illusion of choice anymore.
Yeah, I agree. And I try to explain this to all of my friends that are not libertarians. Every single presidential election in the country is rigged, not by Russia, but by the Republicans and the Democrats against any sort of third party opposition. So whether it's you or Jill Stein or anyone that's trying to give an alternative voice to the Republicans and the Democrats, you're fighting an uphill battle. Given those challenges, how do you feel like your campaign's going? How do you feel like over the last couple of months, as we get closer and closer to Election Day, your campaign has been moving?
Well, I think in the beginning of this campaign cycle, there was a real challenge for anyone alternative to the Republicans and Democrats in the name of RFK. He was taking up a lot of the oxygen of the movement outside the two-party system. But I will say this, as he has moved to endorse Donald Trump, we have seen lots of movement towards our campaign in terms of fundraising. We just had an amazing fundraising weekend because folks wanted to hear an alternative, and now they're starting to really tune into the campaign. And I've met voters along the trail who have said, hey, I was for RFK at the very beginning because I thought, hey, he's Kennedy. He's got a big name. He's the most viable. And then as soon as he dumped for Trump, they were like, hey, we can't roll with this anymore. We came to challenge the two-party system. And I think what we're seeing is a lot of, while we're not maybe getting as much mainstream, obviously, news and attention as the major parties, as the Republicans and Democrats, we are certainly getting a lot of local news attention, and we are hitting the mainstream outlets. Just of course, we're not getting covered as much as them. But what I think we are doing is we're starting to break through into the mainstream a little bit. And I can say I was in Springfield, Ohio, obviously a huge campaign, a hot spot right now because of what Trump said at the debate. But even at the church I was at on Sunday, a guy came up to me after the service. I'm just talking to folks and just trying to hear from them about their experiences. And he comes up, he's like, "Hey, man, I told my wife I thought I might be crazy that was Chase Oliver over there in that pew." And the fact that regular folks in the street are starting to recognize you, the regular guy at church or people at the state fair in Minnesota. I'm just walking around grabbing a corn dog, and people are like, "Oh my gosh, you're Chase Oliver. You're that guy running for president." That tells me that we are starting to break through into the mainstream voter. And maybe not as much as we would like, obviously. We would like to be on everyone's lips. We would like to be the talk of the town everywhere. But we're starting to break through a lot of voters who are really dissatisfied. And I'll tell you, the majority of them are millennials and Gen Zers. And I think that's a good thing for the Libertarian Party going forward. We need to figure out how to capture as much of those two generations as possible, because in 10 years, that's the plurality of voters. That's the majority of voters, vast majority. And so we want to see, what we can do to continue to build moving forward. And my campaign ends in November, but I'm not going to stop helping build the Libertarian Party ever. I'm a lifetime member, and we're going to see what we can do to continue to build moving forward, especially with younger audiences.
I am curious, Chase. What is there? You think that the early voting that a lot of states have implemented is going to have an impact on your campaign? Someone in the comments just actually said that they voted for you today in Illinois. Is that something you think is a potential benefit to third-party candidates and to your campaign?
Well, I think the voters really start paying attention after Labor Day, which is coincidentally right when RFK dropped out. We started getting a lot of renewed interest. I do think early voting can be advantageous if you're advertising yourself out to those likely early voters, which at this point, the most likely early voters, I believe, are those who are younger, particularly women. And we are trying to make sure we gear our messaging. One of the big things about running a presidential campaign is you have to figure out how to market our principles, market ideas to as many people as possible. And we're certainly trying to hit those early voters. I'm going to be early voting in my home state of Georgia to try to push the idea that you can go ahead and get out and vote Libertarian today. And the ease of early voting, you don't have to wait in line. And so I do encourage folks who want to get out and vote, do it as soon as you can. And thank you for that vote in Illinois. You had to write my name in, but of course, Chase Oliver is a pretty easy name to spell. So thank you very much.
Well, I want to talk about some of the specifics of your campaign. So I basically want to break up the rest of our conversation into two different halves. I want to talk a little bit about the conflict within the Libertarian Party and give you a chance to respond to some of that. And then I want to talk to you about some of your policy positions, especially the ones that I know you're very passionate on, like war and the debt. So basically, for those people that are listening that don't understand intra-libertarian party politics, and I'm treading water here. Jacob understands this a lot better than I do. Chase, I know you understand this a lot better than I do. There are a lot of people within the Libertarian Party that were dissatisfied with your campaign. Now, from the outside looking in, my involvement with the Libertarian Party is I love my county affiliate and I love going and drinking whiskey with them and talking about politics. And that's essentially the depth of my involvement in the LP. I'm going to vote for you in Kentucky. There's no way around that. But I know that like Jacob Winograd kind of represents in some ways some of the, I guess, more right-leaning or Mises Caucus oriented people within the Libertarian Party. And we want to talk to you about some of those concerns so that you had a chance to explain where you come down on these issues that are very controversial for libertarians that are having reservations about your campaign. I think just from looking at what's going on Twitter, there have been a lot of very unfair criticisms of the things that you have said in the past, Chase. And I want to just give you the opportunity to talk about that with Jacob here. And Jacob understands those a lot better than me, which is why I'm kind of the middle term here. The first thing, I think the biggest one for a lot of people, not for me personally, but for some other people, are just the comments that you've made in the past about giving gender or hormone therapy to children and things like that. I want you to just explain your position on that to us. I mean, this isn't even central to the race. And again, I think that this is, in terms of like, if you look at the military industrial complex and the debt, this is almost a side issue in a lot of ways. But I do think that there are a lot of libertarians that have reservations about that. And I just wanted to give you a chance to clear the air and explain your position on that issue.
Yeah, ultimately, I support the freedom of individuals to raise their families as they see fit and make the decisions they want to. And once you're an adult, you make the decisions you want to make. I've always been, first and foremost, an advocate to say that surgery is something that should wait till you're an adult because it's a permanent body-altering thing. But what we've seen is in some instances for minors, they get access to hormone therapies or puberty blockers. And these are in accordance with a doctor, mental health professionals, parents. These are the people that I want making those decisions in those very rare instances. That's not most children. That's not even most kids who are questioning their gender, who are going to that level of care. But when it does, I do believe that we should leave that in the realm of parents who have unconditional love for their kids, who are going to be the best advocate for their kids, doctors who swear to do no harm, who should be hopefully someone you as a parent can trust because you've had a relationship with that doctor since the time you've been going to them or the time you've had children and their children have been their patients, and mental health professionals who can best navigate the waters of things like gender dysphoria and other things. I don't want to put that in the hands of bureaucrats. I don't want to put that in the hands of government. And I also don't want to see outright bans on medical treatment that some doctors, most doctors, have approved of. There are some doctors who don't. And if you're a parent and that is the doctor you have decided to seek care from, that is your right as a parent. But I also think we shouldn't be limiting this thing because it's about medical freedom at the end of the day. And when you give government an inch, they can take a mile. And if we want to be consistent as libertarians, we have to say we're going to trust parents to be the best decision makers about their kids' upbringing and about their kids' health in conjunction with other people who parents bring in who are trusted by the parents. And try to keep government out as much as possible. I also include this in things like education freedom. I want parents to make the decision about their school their kids go to. And I also think that if there's a question of gender dysphoria in students, that should be something that is brought to a parent's attention. So I'm fully in the realm of medical freedom, parental rights, and the ability for people to access the medical care that's best for them. And I say this having spoken to people across the spectrum on this issue. I've traveled across all 50 states. I've spoken to both people who are vehemently opposed to this kind of medical intervention, and I've also spoken to people who have received that medical intervention, parents of trans young people. And what I want to err on the side of is freedom, and recognizing that there's nothing that's going to be perfect in this world. And now I also want to, say that I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical professional. I'm not a mental health professional. I'm a candidate for president of the United States, and I have to be talking about what public policy is. What I would do personally as a parent might be very different than what Jacob or you would do as a parent. But what I want to leave it in is the decision-making is made by the parent in conjunction with what they view as best for their child. And I also recognize the arguments that there is a potential danger and side effects to these drugs. There's potential danger and side effects to all drugs. This is why we are consulting medical professionals. But I will say, for those who instantly say, well, if you instantly go on puberty blocker, that's going to sterilize somebody. The truth is puberty blockers was a drug that was developed for young girls going through precocious puberty, girls going through puberty at the ages of 7 or 8 years old. And these drugs were prescribed to those young girls to make sure that they could have the appropriate time to go through pre-adolescence before going into puberty. And by and large, most of the time, that drug is reversible. Once they get to an appropriate age, they're taken off the drug. This is why that drug was approved in the first place. That was its original use. And so I do want to say, while there are side effects, and you should know those side effects as a parent, you should be, informed and be transparent with your doctor. I don't want to keep the government involved in that decision making. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Jacob, since you have been really involved with the Mises Caucus and you've kind of heard some of these criticisms, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so I can appreciate the nuance of what Chase is getting at. I mean, I think Chase is more of the minarchist flavor of libertarian, whereas I'm more on the ANCAP side. So for me, this issue is complicated because my ultimate preference is not just to get government out of healthcare. It's just like I don't think that the government should even exist and everything should be privatized. So there's a sense in which my position wouldn't be that different than Chase's. But I think there's a couple distinctions and concerns that come up in this conversation, which I even heard Chase sort of allude to and at least acknowledge. But I guess I'll kind of flesh those out a little bit more. So I think one, as a parent myself, and I have 5 kids. I understand how impressionable young children are, especially when you're a parent, you have a very grave responsibility in what you expose your child to because they are sort of like mirrors, right? Like they sort of reflect and copy and latch onto everything, good or bad. Trust me, you will figure out so much about yourself and your own character flaws and your own limitations by having kids, because anything you don't like about yourself, they're going to pick that up pretty quickly and mimic it back to you. And you go, oh, I don't like that. I guess I got to look in the mirror a little bit more. So because of this, because I know that children are highly impressionable, I am sometimes concerned about the ways in which certain topics and things that I think are kind of part of an ideology that's sort of believed in and shared by many people in our country are being presented to kids in contexts that I don't think are appropriate. I think trying to talk to 5-year-olds, even 10-year-olds, about sex and gender identity and things like that can be really hard to do. And I think that sometimes kids, because they have really high imaginations, and also they don't have a great understanding of the future, they're not able to, kind of like properly. We understand this for so many other contexts, that children can't consent to things that have very long-term ramifications because they don't have a proper conception of those sort of long-term ramifications and consequences, that we understand that their ability to consent to certain activities isn't the same as an adult. Now, I do agree that ultimately, do I want the state to be involved in deciding what families do with their children? Well, obviously not, as a ANCAP libertarian. However, my concern would be in that we don't have a free market in healthcare right now. And so we kind of have a situation where, although I do believe that ultimately, so I think Chase and I would agree that the ideal solution to all this is to free up the healthcare system, privatize everything. But I think that there is just a legitimate concern shared by many, not just libertarians, but just by a lot of Americans, that, well, there seems to be a lot of government involvement in our healthcare system. And so they're concerned that these private, decisions are sort of being influenced by outside forces, which is also a concern that came up with, I know, something we'll probably talk about after this, which is like the COVID mandates and vaccines and things like that. But that's sort of where the concern comes from, is that if we had a true free market in healthcare, I would actually be a bit more comfortable with believing that, like, there is informed consent and side effects and consequences and things like that are being discussed, and that there isn't some, certain agendas being pushed. But while the state is so entrenched in our healthcare system, I'm concerned that, just as we see a lot of abuses in healthcare and inefficiencies in healthcare and other areas, that this is also going to be a situation where that's going to be problematic. And that's not to say that I think that Chase's position or my position should be, the solution is to get state more involved, but just rather to call attention to, be like, hey, you have a concern about this. That's a reasonable concern. This is why, we don't want to, as libertarians, prescribe state solutions for state-created problems. We should offer libertarian solutions for state-created problems. And so I hope that may make sense.
Yeah. What do you think, Jason?
Yeah. Well, I think a couple of things. First, of course, we want to get the government out of healthcare as much as possible. We want to have as much choice for individuals as possible. And I think it is important to recognize that not every person's healthcare regimen or what is proper healthcare for each person is going to be the same for each and every person. This is why we oppose socialized healthcare, because it's top down. It creates the cracks that people fall through. So there's very much alignment there. And I think what we need to do is not focus on what individuals are doing, especially when they're certainly good faith individuals who are exercising healthcare and with response to gender dysphoria and being trans. What we need to do is we need to address the root causes of the problem, which is the state being involved in healthcare, and seek to decouple ourselves. It's the same reason why I say, the problem isn't, the problem with crime is not just, hey, let's throw a bunch of people in cells. It's actually, there's poverty involved. There's lots of other contributing factors, and that we need to address if we're going to address the root cause of something. So I think healthcare freedom is something that, broadly speaking, libertarians can agree with across the board, even if they disagree with individuals' healthcare decisions. And I think that's where there's a broad agreement there. And the last thing I would want to say on this is, what is appropriate to discuss with your family, with your children, should be something that you are making the decisions about. But I do think there are ways to have age-appropriate discussions about all kinds of things. And then there are obviously age-appropriate ways to have discussions with things. I would argue, I'm a Christian myself. I teach my nephews when they were little kids, and nephews and nieces, hey, Jesus loves you, God loves you, he's going to take care of you. I did not, when they were 5 and 6 years old, get into the deeper conversations about the philosophy and the meaning of our theology, and get into those deep theological discussions, because they're children. They don't need to be that involved in things. Similarly, hey, Timmy has two dads or Timmy has two moms. It really is about as far as you need to really go with that conversation. You don't have to really get in depth about the nitty gritty and the details of those things to acknowledge that other families exist that might be different than your own. And that's an age appropriate way to describe those things or talk about those things. And you as a parent should be discussing, what that appropriateness is and what schools your kids go to, what the curriculum is that they're exposed to, all of those things. Really, this is why I call for a culture war ceasefire. And we can discuss that a little bit later.
Yeah, and I definitely want to get to that. I wanted to ask you about COVID, too, which is a very good segue, because I think we all agree that if the FDA didn't exist, then a lot of these problems also would not exist. And I think that a lot of the chaos that was caused by COVID was driven by the pharmaceutical industrial complex and their regulatory helpers at the FDA. But there have been some libertarians that have dug up some old tweets of yours, Chase, where you were like wearing a mask or talking about social distancing and things like that. Now, I was on a podcast last week defending your record on that issue. And a part of it was that, like, in my job, I was forced to wear a mask or I would lose my job. And so if you go to my school's website or, Twitter feed, social media feed, you can scroll back in 2021, 2022 and find plenty of pictures of me wearing a mask because I did not want to get fired and I didn't have any other option. So I just wanted to get your perspective on the pandemic, Chase, like the response to it, the mandates, the vaccines, all of that stuff. Where do you stand on all that? And yes, you did post some things about social distancing and about wearing masks. What was the rationale behind that during that time?
Yeah, well, first off, I think it's important to note that I've always been solidly anti-lockdown, anti-mandate, pro-healthcare freedom, pro-make your own decisions. I don't want to force the government to make anybody's healthcare decisions about anything, including vaccines, masking, distancing, or anything. However, I am a supporter of property rights. I do think if you have a property, you can decide someone needs to be wearing a mask to come on my property, or you're going to have a vaccine to be employed by me. Those are in line with property rights. Is it perfect? No. Are there people who get harmed by that? Yes. But freedom, again, is imperfect, but it causes less harm than the state sanction or central planning. That's just a fact. You can look across the board with really anything. Decentralization, individual decision making, the free market is better. And so that's where I've always fallen along those lines. Now, the pictures of me wearing a mask, the one of me in front of Wax and Facts, which is a local record store in Atlanta, that was me campaigning for Congress during the summer of 2020, when literally no one would let you into a business or a shop in the city of Atlanta unless you were wearing a mask. And so the only way I could campaign about freedom is, ironically enough, if I were wearing a mask into a store. But I also think if you want to wear a mask, you should be able to without shame. It's your decision making. I have a family member who is immunocompromised, who I spend a lot of time around. And so I made the decisions I wanted to make for myself and my particular condition as a 37-year-old at the time, 36-year-old, almost 40 now. It was so long ago, thank God. But part of this is about individual decision making. One of the most common tweets they see is about me saying I'm wearing a mask at Thanksgiving dinner with my family, right? But what they never show you is what that tweet is in response to. The tweet is in response to Lori Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, saying that small gatherings are more dangerous than large gatherings, and so you're literally killing your neighbors if you have a Thanksgiving dinner. And me saying, excuse me, no, I'm going to exercise my freedom. I'm going to do what I want to do based on, what my family is comfortable with, what we've all agreed to, so that we can enjoy Thanksgiving together, basically. And so that when you only see the response, you don't see what I'm responding to, it can tell a very different story. But I've never, ever supported the government mandating any of these decisions to be made on your own. And I think it's best if, you make your own decisions for yourself. And ultimately, anybody who really supports, say, vaccines or masking or distancing or anything, also shouldn't be requiring the state to do that, because good ideas, and if that's what you think is a good idea, shouldn't require force.
Yeah, you didn't tell the American population that wearing a mask is patriotic, like Donald Trump. I mean,
and I think that is in line with freedom, because I'm not going to shame people for the most, unless you do something terribly shameful, which we're about to watch a VP debate later tonight. We can decide how shameful that is when we get there.
yeah.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. I think the other concern, and this is the one, maybe I'll have you come in on this one first, Jacob, but you have in the past posted some criticisms about Ron Paul and Lou Rockwell. And I know for me personally, and for Jacob as well, like I'm a big Mises Institute guy. I love Murray Rothbard. I love Ludwig von Mises. I love Friedrich Hayek. And it kind of feels like with some of those comments, that was maybe a criticism of that wing of the Libertarian Party, or not of the Libertarian Party, but that wing of the Libertarian movement and that type type of libertarian philosophy. And so, Jacob, I wanted maybe to let you open this up here, since I know that you've seen this from the inside. Just maybe kind of walk us through how people in the Mises Caucus or more right-leaning libertarians would have perceived that. And then I want Chase to kind of explain where he was at when he was posting those things.
Yeah, so if I were to put my finger on it, I think that this kind of actually ties all the maybe criticisms together, is that a lot of the sort of like Ron Paul, Mises Institute libertarian types, which I would consider myself one of those as well, we tend to sort of like see a pattern where we look at and there's not like a good word for it, right? And so it's a little sloppy, but we'll kind of look at what kind of seems like the sort of like mainstream sort of like establishment, which you can kind of see like through sort of like the sort of like unity that you see in the media, and how they sort of seem to provide cover and sort of sort of like a one direction sort of slanted view of current events and what's going on in politics and presidential elections, or even just regular state elections. We sort of see a lot of people call it the deep state, or the uniparty, the regime. There are a lot of different words for this, but and we sort of see that there's a lot of state propaganda, state power, normalization of state control that is sort of promulgated and sort of like infused into our society, not necessarily always through like the passing of direct laws, but through sort of weaponizing what people might call kind of like, quasi-private institutions. But these are kind of like, in a way, sort of like fascistic extensions of the state itself. And this was kind of what people were saying during the COVID lockdowns. This is similar to what my concern was with the gender affirming care concern. And I think that's part of the issue, is that, the Ron Paul libertarian is sometimes, calling out things that other libertarians might say, like, well, this is just a private entity. It's a private business. We shouldn't be criticizing what they do. If they have if they're in March of 2020 or November of 2020, a private business wants to say everyone needs to wear a mask, some of the libertarians are like, well, we're going to defend their right to do that. Whereas the Ron Paul libertarian might say, okay, well, maybe they have like, in a really technical sense, the right to do that. But we should also be critical of that, because they're either the victim of sort of state propaganda, which is why they're doing that, or they're perhaps like gleefully becoming part of sort of the apparatus, sort of like an extension of the state's influence in society, sort of giving the state more power than it might have on paper to enforce certain norms. And we see this through many examples, through education, through the media, and I would say that's part of the problem, and yes, it does tend to be targeted towards maybe the left side of the culture war a little bit more, because I think that is what a lot of us kind of catch on, is that it's sort of like a coastal elite, sort of DC city elite sort of like ethos that is behind a lot of this. This is where you get like Hillary Clinton calling half of America deplorables. I mean, and listen, this isn't said like. I'm not a Donald Trump supporter. I mean, I'm actually very similar to you, Chase. I came from the Democratic Party. I was an anti-war leftist back when those still existed. So I don't really have a lot of love for Donald Trump or MAGA and all that. But I do think, and this is part of why I left the Democratic Party, that although the right definitely has its issues, it does seem like the left has a little bit of a stranglehold on the media, on entertainment, on Hollywood, the universities, just a lot of our institutions. And so we're tending to punch a little bit more and call out things sort of like in that direction, and not always sort of like defend it, because, well, it might seemingly on paper just be the actions of private individuals. Because sometimes things that are like, the left likes to talk about fascism, but then when you point out things that actually kind of resemble what fascism is, which is sort of like an unholy merging of state and corporate power, they seem to kind of turn a blind eye to it when it's like they're pandering, right? And this is like regardless of where you stand on culture war issues, like do you not see like sort of an issue where I remember as like a Bernie Sanders leftist, people going like eat the rich and protesting on Wall Street and like being against big corporations and big bankers, but then suddenly it's like over the last 6 to 8 years, it's like, well, now, we put, same with like the military industrial complex, like, well, we put rainbows on it now, and we're for diversity. And so now it's like they're using culture as a shield for the violence and authoritarianism that they sort of push out there. And that's where I see a lot of like Mises Institute, Ron Paul libertarians talking about. And they I guess the perception is that you've been critical of a lot of that. So I guess that's kind of steel manning the concerns.
So I just want to say a couple of things in response to that. So first and foremost, I think it's no surprise to many that I'm gay, right? I think everybody knows that, whether you love me or hate me, right? Shock and surprise to people. And the truth is I am happy that LGBTQ people can serve if they want to in the military. I think it's probably a bad idea considering how close we are to going to war around the world, but that's there. But you know what I don't like is I don't appreciate them trying to sell those wars based on diversity and inclusion. And frankly, I'm going to call out the war machine. I don't care who's serving. And in fact, I'm going to call out the violence around the world, no matter who we're perpetrating violence against. I call it the military industrial complex regardless. But I do think, this idea that, that we throw a rainbow on it, and so all of a sudden, the left is in love with the military-industrial complex. Well, we threw an American flag on the military-industrial complex for 20 years, and the right was all about it. And yes, there were people who were calling that out, but many of these people right now who are calling me a leftist were just as they were clapping right along with, the American flag and Toby Keith for years during the beginning of the war on terror. And so for people to question my anti-war bona fides because I may come from the left, it just makes me laugh every time because I'm going to call out the wars regardless. But when we see these, I also think that we can't go around thinking that every single person is being guided by just because the government is saying something that's a bad idea or a good idea. Do I think, yes, there's a lot of corporate capture and corporate control over our government? Absolutely. And that's not just the Democratic Party, that's the Republican Party. That's both parties, that's the Uniparty. They are both controlled by giant corporate entities that basically have captured our government. This is one of the reasons why I go around the country arguing no corporate subsidies and no deductions for anybody. Just lower the tax code overall so more people can emerge in the market as entrepreneurs. I still argue free market principles, exposing the fact that our government is bought and paid for by corporations, exposing the government that are bought and paid for by a pharmaceutical complex, a medical industrial complex, the prison industrial complex. So much of what our government has done is basically guided by lobbyist dollars, pushing us one way or another. And I travel across the country speaking about that all the time. But what I don't do is I won't attack, a mom and pop shop owner for saying, hey, wear a mask if you want to come in my business. Like, I just find that to be reductive because you're not going to get somebody on their side if you're calling them a dupe. And I think it's better just to say, hey, make your own decisions. It's a decision I don't make, but I would really like to talk to you about freedom. And you bring them in that way. You have to bring people in with positivity. And I can say that's the best way, I think, to grow a movement. And if we automatically question the choices that people make on their own, and you can say the government has influenced, and you can talk about how that government may have influenced your decision making. Certainly, many of the people who are clapping along with Toby Keith in the beginning of the war on terror were people who were being influenced by the government, saying that we have to fight this war in Afghanistan and Iraq for your freedom, for your kids, for your safety, for your security, and recognizing that people are flawed individuals and that sometimes their motivation can be pushed by a government one way or the other. You don't punish that person. You attack the systems that are manipulating them. And most of that is corporate capture of our government or our government itself. And that's something that I've always wanted to do. Now, we started this question with about Ron Paul and Lew Rockwell, and I do want to answer both of those really quickly. First off, the Ron Paul tweet that people expose I was being hyperbolic in that post. It was in March of 2020. I was working in the shipping industry. People I had known in my industry had already died of COVID. And so when I saw the article, COVID is a hoax, which means it is not real, he was being hyperbolic. Much of the things he said came to pass and were very much true. But when he was being hyperbolic, I was hyperbolic in response. And then the world turned upside down a week later, and I kind of even forgot I made that post on Facebook and leave it to let a picture tell 1,000 words, even if those 1,000 words aren't correct. If you look at the things I've said about Ron Paul, I've said plenty of complimentary things about Ron Paul. Lew Rockwell, this is a one individual personal thing. I don't like Lew Rockwell. You're not going to convince me to like Lew Rockwell. I'm sorry. If that's your single issue as a voter, I apologize. I've lost your vote. But on 99% of everything else, we can agree. But personally, I don't like Lew Rockwell.
Which, I mean, that's personality types are different. So I totally understand that. I know we got about 19 minutes left. And I want to be respectful of your time and give you a chance to hit some of the issues that are really important to you. The last question I have about the libertarian movement is that there is a lot of diversity in the libertarian movement. You have like the two extremes, like the Libertarian Party of Louisiana and like the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire. And then you have the Mises Institute and Reason Magazine, and they represent very different points on the libertarian spectrum. How do we bring libertarians together to form a cohesive movement that actually makes a political difference in the United States?
Well, I can say this: there's a lot less daylight between, I guess, like myself and maybe Jacob and LP Louisiana than there is to, I think, the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire. Out of all those people you named, is the furthest outside of that spectrum, and the one that I think deserves the most criticism. Frankly, that's just my personal opinion.
I actually
and I think
happen to agree. So,
and so, like, that's where I feel about that. But with regard to most of the rest of those people you named, there's really not a whole lot of daylight of difference sometimes with policy. Sometimes it's the way we execute communicating that policy or marketing those policies or what our priority list is. But one of the things I've tried to do as a candidate for president, both in the primary and as a candidate, is try to be outward facing and not inward facing towards criticisms and fighting inward. Even as plenty of people have demanded, please go on a podcast and fight with me about the Libertarian Party, which I don't think we're doing here. We're having a discussion. Yeah. Certain other people want to definitely have a fight. And it's like, I'm trying to communicate our values outward. I'm not trying to sit here and argue within the pond. I'm trying to grow the pond. And so I think it's more valuable to have these kinds of discussions that we're having. But, for me, I think there is room for a broad tent in the Libertarian Party. There's room for broad spectrum. One of the most important things I think about libertarianism is that it allows those differences of values. You can be a very conservative person personally. You can be a very progressive person or a very out of the box, just really outside the norm person. Meet some of the people who come to our convention. Like, let's be real, right? But you can do that so long as you're not requesting that the state push your values upon other people. That is the essential thing that guides us all together, is that we don't want the state to be involved, that we believe in the free market of ideas. We believe in a true free market of, hey, you live as you want to live, I'll live as I want to live. And if we're not hurting each other, violating each other's liberty, we're going to have to just understand that we're going to live in a world with different people in it. Because if you only want to live in a world with people just like yourself, you're going to have to kill a whole lot of people, right? Because there's just a whole lot of people that aren't like you. In fact, you're going to have to kill everyone but yourself, because everyone's different, right? We're all a group of individuals that can form communities and neighborhoods and associations and political parties and institutes and whatever you want to put the name of it, of people coming together. But at the end of the day, we're like 7 billion, 8 billion, whatever it is, individuals around the world living our lives.
Yeah. Jacob, just final thoughts on that before we move into the issue here.
Yeah, well, there's a lot there I agree with. I mean, for one, I think what would help is for libertarians of different persuasions or leanings to have conversations like this and to, learn to appreciate differences of opinion. I think that's a virtue of freedom, of libertarianism, of free markets, is that sort of like pluralistic idea that, like, we can have conversations, do the comparing and contrasting of where we come from, and be able to unite on the things that we do agree on. Even though I have some disagreements with Chase and criticisms at time, I've also been very vocal in defending him and blasting some of his very good points, his good moments in debates and conversations he's been in. I have a Chase Oliver yard sign that I just got from my county chair that's in my front yard. So, ultimately, I think that for us to be a big tent, we have to learn to sort of simultaneously work together on the things we agree on, but then also have, and the key here is good faith discussions about our disagreements. And I think Chase would probably agree that there has been too much on both sides, a willingness to immediately escalate to sort of like mudslinging and character attacks and sort of assuming the worst in people that they disagree with, instead of trying to find common ground and work together on the areas where we do agree. And I would have to also agree with one of Chase's points where he said that the best way that we can respond to people we disagree with is to, instead of alienating them or name calling them or anything like that, is to try to have a conversation with them. Because if you, like, even though I might have criticisms for like the small business owner who like, we're going to enforce mask mandates, I would agree with Chase that responding to those people by name calling them and smearing them and things like that is not a good way to move forward. Ultimately, if we want libertarianism to grow, we do kind of have to. I do think that our movement and the party has a bit of a culture problem, and both sides need to have honest conversations and honest attempts to look inward to address that culture problem. Because too many people I know actually agree with the ideas that we talk about, or at least 80-90% of the ideas we talk about, but they don't want to get involved because when they start tipping their toe into the Libertarian Party world, all they see is the vitriol and drama, and people just like, we're all busy, right? Like, I have 5 kids. The spare time I have is very limited, and I don't want to waste it on drama. So although I do want to have good faith conversations like this one where we can, hash out certain disagreements, like, we have to do those conversations and then get to work on the stuff we do agree on.
Yeah,
well,
I love that.
And I know we're about to move on. I just want to shout out one last thing while we're talking inter-party stuff, just to go ahead and clear the air, because this is one of the things you hear in inter-party Twitter. There was some sort of backroom deal to make Mike Tremont Chase's running mate. I want to tell you exactly how that happened, okay? Let me just go through that process.
Yeah, sure.
And I want to shout out Mike because he's about to go through the VP debate stuff and be live tweeting. But and he's a great running mate. He's a fantastic running mate. I knew going in there might be a position where I would have to make a deal on the floor to create a combined ticket, to create a unified ticket to win the nomination. Anybody who goes into a convention knows that this might be something that happens. Mike gets eliminated in round 5, I believe it was. We went through 7 rounds of voting. Mike eliminated round 5. I walk up to Mike and I say, "Hey, Mike, do you want to be my running mate? I think we could be a good team together." Dr. Rechtenwald's team made the same offer. He thought about it, and he chose me. That was literally the entire meeting. There was no back room. It was right there in front of everybody. That being said, Mike's been a fantastic running mate. He's an Austrian economist. He's somebody who's very much in line with very much of the economic beliefs. And frankly, he's a much more conservative person than I am, I would say personally. And I think he could be, and he's always attempted to be trying to unify this party around this ticket. I appreciate him for that. And I know he's going to do an awesome job live tweeting tonight. And then he's doing some media after the debate to respond to it. And let's all be real. I think all 3 of us could agree that it would be a better debate if he was on the stage.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Well, in the last couple of minutes that we have, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about the issues that are the most important to you. I think that your greatest quality as a presidential candidate when compared to Kamala Harris or Donald Trump is that you are not a war criminal like both of them are. And in fact, war is one of the
really high bar there.
Yeah, really high bar. But no, it's incredible that the majority of Americans are going to vote for a war criminal in 4 months. I think that says a lot about American civilization. But Chase, today, Iran responded to Israel and bombed some targets within Israel. I've looked at the news for 4 minutes today, so I don't know exactly what's going on with that right now. But we're obviously involved in a lot of proxy wars overseas. We've been fighting in the Middle East for longer than I or you or Jacob have been alive. What would you do to undo that?
Well, I think first and foremost, if I were president, I'd be sending a clear signal to Netanyahu that you're not going to get the blank check of the United States to back you if you expand this war, which is what they've done into Lebanon. And now we've seen an escalation from Iran. We loudly and clearly need a president. I don't know if our current president can say anything loudly or clearly right now, but President Biden needs to loudly and clearly call for a ceasefire and signify to Israel that we're not going to be backing this expansion with Iran. We need to make a signal to Iran that if Iran directly threatens the United States, they are effed and they will be destroyed. That is the most important thing. If you attack us directly, that's a whole new ballgame. But if you're engaging yourself in this regional conflict, I have an advisor, and he says this all the time. The way these two communities talk to each other is by launching missiles at each other. And I think it's more important for us to recognize that the victims here are the people of Israel, the people of Gaza, the people of Lebanon, the people of Iran, whose governments are bloodthirsty, whose governments communicate with one another by launching munitions at the innocent civilians in each other's country, and that both should be rejecting this. And what we are seeing from the Netanyahu government are actions that are making it less likely to see peace for the average Israeli. What we are seeing out of Hamas are actions that have made it less likely to be a safe and secure place for Gazans. And we're seeing the same out of Hezbollah and out of Iran. all of these people, the governments that represent them, are terrible. They're tyrannical, they're authoritarian, and they are deciding for their people that violence is the course to be taking. And we need to be rejecting this on all fronts. But certainly where we have been funding billions and billions and billions of dollars to the nation of Israel, we need to signify to them that they, alongside us, must be the first and loudest voice for a ceasefire, because we are the people who have the outsized influence based on the billions of dollars we send them. And we need to ultimately, as a foreign policy objective, reject military aid around the world completely. We need to quit exporting our values with the bomb, the bullet, and the drone, and re-engage in diplomacy, free trade, voluntary exchange, and quit trying to be the military arm, strong-arming the rest of the world. Because what we do is we create blowback, as we've seen many great libertarians say in the past, and it's coming to fruition over and over again. It creates where we support terrible authoritarians like the Saudis, where we gave them hundreds of billions of dollars. By the way, Donald Trump, I didn't start any new wars. BS. You sold hundreds of billions of dollars to the Saudis of weaponry that has killed untold numbers of Yemeni and created starvation conditions for many, many more and displaced many, many more. And so don't say you haven't started a war when you created airstrikes in Syria and when you drone bombed thousands of people. I will say this, and this is one of the things that really upsets me because I'm so ardently anti-war. I get accused of being a child mutilator because of the position on trans issues. Well, how many children has Donald Trump mutilated with his drone bombs around the world? How many kids have been blown to bits by the Biden administration or the Obama administration or the Bush White House or any White House since I've been alive? The government is violence, and they're far more violent than I could ever be because I've never signed off on one drone bombing. But each and every one of them is guilty, and we need to expose it.
How do you convince the average American? Because like even the progressive, I mean, we're all Christians here, but even the progressive Christians that I know are like, yeah, what Kamala Harris is doing is bad, but like we can overlook that. But for me, and I know Jacob, for you too, like this is a non-negotiable issue. How do we convince people that this is horrible and we shouldn't be supporting it?
You got to show them the honest truth.
Yeah, well, I'll let you speak first, sir. Sorry.
Go ahead, Jacob.
Well, no, first of all, I just want to say you stole my talking point because I was about to say that we do not give Republicans and I'm a conservative, but I will not give Republicans or conservatives an inch if they want to criticize you on the gender affirming care for minors stuff. Because even though I disagree with you on that, you know what? Compared to the amount of dead children that are on the responsible that are the right wing has been responsible for the last 20 years, and the left wing too. But it all started with the reason I became a Democrat and anti-war was seeing what the right wing evangelical base did, urging George Bush on to go and basically slaughter a million people in Afghanistan and Iraq, continuing what they had started in the 80s and 90s. So no, like. If the right or anyone wants to stand on the, what about the children? It's like, no, you need to look at Donald Trump. You need to look at Obama. You need to look at Biden. You need to look at Harris. You need to look at all these war criminals, and you need to hold them to account and actually be anti-war before you start to criticize Chase for being like, oh, he doesn't protect children enough. It's like, please. And second of all, I think to really get people to wake up to this, it means like, having uncomfortable conversations where you show people the results of this foreign policy, to show them the devastation that it causes. You have to make it personal for them to be like, you know what? Like, because especially for a lot of conservatives, and they talk a lot about family values. Listen, there's no one more for family values than me. I have 5 kids. So I go to people at my church, I go to people in my community who also have kids, and I show them pictures of what happens when we write blank checks to Israel and we write blank checks for these weapons manufacturers to send weapons to the Saudis or to Ukraine or anything. It results in families destroyed. It results in children growing up without their parents and becoming radicalized to join these extremist groups.
I want to loop this around too to the idea of this is a Libertarian Christian Institute. I want to talk a little bit about how our faith picture can factor in here. I just got back from Springfield. I went to church there. I spoke to folks at a church service who aid Haitian immigrants. I spoke to a woman who she helps Haitian immigrants learn English, and she had men with literal swastikas surrounding her building that previous day, and they're having to move the operations to the church because the church has round-the-clock security to make sure that people are safe. And we remember, like, these people who denigrate Haitians or other immigrants, we need to remind ourselves it's our own government that has destabilized Haiti time and time again. It's our own government that has destabilized Latin America time and time again, because our CIA or our national security apparatus favors destabilizing those regions instead of having governments they don't like rising up in those regions, which I don't think is any way for us to be operating. And again, it creates further blowback and further division and further hatred of the United States around the world. And so as Christians, I recognize that each and every person has universal human value. Each person has universal human worth. And that, but for the grace of God, I could be in the shoes of an immigrant from Haiti who came here with nothing and has to build something for themselves and their family. Right. And so for me, I loop this around to recognize that each and every individual person has worth, has value, but that government and its monopoly on violence too often discounts the value of those individual people. And this is why we feel so comfortable separating ourselves. Oh, the government's the one bombing those people. But it's our tax money that's being taken out of our pocket to fund that. And so we should be rightfully outraged. And anytime murder is happening at the hands of the military industrial complex, I ask that communities of faith rise up to speak out against it. And I say the same to the government of Russia and to the government of Ukraine. They're at war right now. But I understand that Russia is the one who crossed that boundary, and we have to condemn them just as much as any other war criminal. And again, I don't condemn the Russian people for the crimes of their government, just like I wouldn't condemn, certainly. If I condemn people for their crimes of their government, we'd have to be doing a lot of condemning of our own people. And I certainly don't do that. And so I'm traveling to the stormed regions tomorrow in the Carolinas. And guess what people aren't going to be asking me when I'm helping to clear debris? Who'd you vote for in the last election? What's your faith? What are your values? No, are you here to help? Good. And that's the kind of universal human language that we need to start speaking more. And as libertarians, because we believe in decentralization and individualization, we are the best. We are the best messengers that message in the political realm and the political philosophy, and we can certainly do that in our own lives too.
Yeah. The other issue that you're really, really good on and really, really passionate about has to do with the debt and the deficit that we're facing right now. Obviously, the United States is $35 trillion and counting in debt. The Federal Reserve continues to manipulate the economy for the interests of the elites. How do we go about ending that? Because the economy really is rigged against the common person, and this level of debt and spending that we're currently on is unsustainable. And again, a lot of this money that's created by the Federal Reserve goes to buying guns and bombs that kill all these innocent people overseas. So all of these policies are connected. How do we go about stopping that, Jace?
It starts with, well, first off, it starts with educating the voters about what's going on. Many of them don't realize anything about these things. But economy-wise, to start getting our economy back on the correct track, we have to at least balance the budget, at least cut enough government out of the way where we're not printing trillions of dollars a year and devaluing the dollar. Then we can focus on the auditing and ending of the Fed, so we can expose what's going on in the Federal Reserve, exposing the problems and finding, and being able to offer their solutions of getting ourselves off this broken fiat currency system that we're on. But it all starts with being able to explain to the American people the primary driver of that inflation that you're feeling in your wallet is not corporate greed, which is what they're selling you in mass media. Corporations were greedy 5 years ago. They'll be greedy 5 years from now. The primary driver of that inflation that's hitting your wallet is the trillions of dollars a year that's being printed in deficit spending. $8.9 billion every single day right now is being added to the deficit. $8.9 billion. $3 billion a day is being spent just to cover the interest on the debt alone. It is unsustainable. And so we need to communicate to voters loud and clear as much as possible that if we do not want to be, if we don't want to be careening off of the cliff in the car, we want to hit the brakes. It starts with balancing the budget and actually exposing what's going on at the Federal Reserve by auditing the Fed and allowing for congressional oversight. Because once the American people see what the Federal Reserve is up to, once they understand how they are manipulating things, they want to see it put to an end. But it starts with getting our fiscal house in order, demanding that voters make that a requirement of those people that they vote for, whether they're Democratic, Republican, Libertarian, Independent, whoever. And we have to recognize that it's not a crazy idea. They call us radical now for wanting to balance the budget, but in the 90s, that was the goal. That was the goal of the Contract for America and what Bill Clinton and the Republicans were trying to work towards. Now, granted, they did that through tax increases and some other funky math. We need to do it through actually cutting government. But it's not a radical idea to say that our government should be putting its fiscal house in order and removing ourselves from this manipulation of the marketplace that is allowing your groceries to go up, your rent to go up, everything you buy to go up so much faster than it needs to be through market manipulation.
Yeah. Well, Chase, we've hit the hour mark, and I really appreciate your time tonight. Is there anything else that you would like to tell our audience about what you believe, what you're passionate about, what your campaign represents before I let you tell my audience where they can find you, follow you, and support you?
Yeah, I'm absolutely passionate about letting voters know that they have an alternative to the two-party system in this election. Please go to my website, which I'll let you know in a moment, but look at my platform against that of Kamala Harris, against that of Donald Trump, and actually have a blind taste test. Try to take your bias out of it and see what you really think would be better for the future of America, not for the next 2 years, for the next 4 years, but for the next 20 years or 40 years to get ourselves back on track. I would encourage voters to recognize that I'm somebody who really wants to bring this party together. And that trust me, there have been headwinds that this party has faced, that this campaign has faced, and every time a libertarian tries to run for president, there's some sort of headwind facing them. We will continue to plow ahead through the next 34 days until Election Day, and making sure that libertarians have a true alternative on the ballot. And the name is Chase Oliver and Mike Termott. And I encourage voters to get out and support us. And please, I'll plug myself now. I'll just go ahead and plug it. If you go to votechaseoliver.com right now, you can join our group of volunteers who are going to be doing that get out the vote effort and the final push before Election Day. You can be phone banking, text banking, door knocking, helping your neighbors know what's going on. Or if you're in a position to help support this campaign, please do, because we're going to be doing OTT advertising across the spectrum as early voting gets started. When you see YouTube videos and you see an ad, we're going to try to make sure it's a Chase Oliver ad. When you go to on Hulu, we're going to try to make sure if you're a likely libertarian voter, they're getting reminded to go vote Chase Oliver. For every $100, you can reach 15,000 impressions through this advertising. So you can help us reach hundreds of thousands, if not millions of voters across America by donating today at votechaseoliver.com.
Well, Chase, I really appreciate talking with you today. Jacob, this is your show, so I'm going to hand it over to you and let you land the airplane here.
Well, I was just going to say really quick, here LCI, because we're a nonprofit, we cannot endorse political parties or candidates. But I will say, just for the voters out there, to consider this. Every 4 years, it is the most important election in our lifetime. Perhaps one might think that voting for either one of the two parties that always seems to win, and then we always end up in 4 more years being in the same quote-unquote dire straits where one half the country thinks we're about to fall into a dictatorship and the other half thinks we're about to fall into full-blown Marxism, communism. Perhaps there might be a third way, I don't know, to consider voting that might be worth considering, so that we can try something different. They say the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So I don't know. I can't endorse anybody, but I would say just maybe consider trying something different. Leave it at that.
If I could leave you guys with a Bible verse.
Absolutely.
Pardon me. I want to pull it out because when I read King James, it's hard because I'm dyslexic. But when I was at church this Sunday, we read Psalms 91. And I think it's very important. And this time right now to be thinking about it. So Psalms 91 verse 3 is, surely he shall deliver you from the snares of the fowler and the perilous pestilence. He shall cover you with his feathers. He shall take you under his wings and take refuge. His truth shall be your shield and buckler. You shall not be afraid of the terror by night, nor the arrow that flies by day, nor the pestilence that walks in darkness, nor the destruction that lays waste at nobody. And so when we retain our faith and our love for one another, anything is possible, and we are all, thankfully, under the protection of an all-loving God.
That's a great way to end it, Chase. Appreciate you coming on, and Alex, appreciate you kind of organizing and running this. I thought we did a good job at talking about the areas of disagreement, but ultimately highlighting why I think libertarian ideas are just superior to that which the mainstream establishment of one side or the other tries to offer us. So thank you, Chase, for being here again. Thank you, everyone who tuned in to watch, and we will talk to you again next time. Take care.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. If you have any questions or comments, please reach out to me at theprotestantlibertarian@gmail.com. You can also find me on Twitter. You can follow me at the handle @ProLibertyPod. Again, that is @ProLibertyPod. And you can also visit me at theprotestantlibertarianpodcast.com. At theprotestantlibertarianpodcast.com, you can also support the Christians for Liberty Network and the Libertarian Christian Institute. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode, and we will see you next Tuesday.